but it was one that the consortium thought was very important that they participate in and that they lead. They were willing to work together to develop allocations or caps for nitrogen loads for the agency's consideration, rather than having the agencies come in and say, okay, this is yours, this is yours, this is yours. It was an extensive process, but I think one that it was very fair overall, because we used the same process for all the sources. But this was a collaborative decision that the permitted entities, agriculture, decided they wanted to drive the bus rather than to have the allocations be developed by the regulatory agencies. Again, we've got 45 public and private partners, and how each one of them now has a cap on their source that is equal to the nitrogen loads that they had in 2003 to 2007, the average of 4 years during that time. That was the determination by the consortium members that they came up with, that they felt was fair to everyone, and those caps are now being incorporated into permits. How they're meeting and not exceeding goals that were 2003 to 2007 loads are by implementing additional projects that offset any new loads. So for instance, wastewater treatment plant, we've got 1 million more people in our watershed, we have a lot more wastewater to treat now. They are offsetting their loads by going to more reuse, which reduces their nitrogen load for reuse by about 90%. And so each entity has figured out a way to somehow offset loads that are increasing with increasing growth in our area. Our local governments are also working together. Most of them have both a wastewater treatment and a stormwater permit. And many times it's easier for the stormwater section to implement additional stormwater treatment, or in some cases fertilizer ordinances, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. That reduces their nitrogen load from stormwater that the wastewater treatment plant then can use if they need that extra credit as they are treating more wastewater from additional population. So every one of these different entities has figured out a way to implement projects that allows them to bank credits, if you will, so that when they need it as they grow, they will have that credit. There are about 500 projects and actions that have been implemented through these 45 different entities around the Bay, everything from improvements in wastewater and industrial discharges. Our electric utilities, almost all of them now, actually all of them now have moved from coal or oil to natural gas, which reduces their emissions very significantly. And our stormwater especially from our local counties that are highly urbanized, they have implemented now fertilizer ordinances, which reduces the amount of fertilizer on residential lawns or residential landscapes that can be applied, nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer. In Tampa Bay area, our heavy rainfall is in the summertime, and so that any fertilizer that is put down during this time, much of it can just run off. And so through the estuary program, our partners have developed a model ordinance that restricts the use of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer during the summertime from residential areas. Agricultural is exempt, as are community gardens, that sort of thing. And so it is for lawns, essentially. So there's a 4-month restriction, no nitrogen or phosphorus for 4 months, June, July, August, and September, during our rainy season. 2 of our entities, 2 of our local governments have also implemented a point of sales restriction during the same time, so that you cannot buy the nitrogen or phosphorus in the stores where you might purchase it. That doesn't certainly preclude someone from going to the next county over and buying it and coming back, but it has been an effective way for our local governments to enact the ordinances that they now have adopted. That has been very successful in terms of reducing nitrogen and phosphorus during our summer months. We're still evaluating the effects of this. These came into effect about 3 years ago now. But we have seen improvements in water quality. We can't point to any one thing, but we think that certainly this is an important part of the mix, and that's what it has come down to now. There's so many different sources of nitrogen that it takes effort on all parts in order to be able to not break the caps that now are in effect. With all these actions, a nitrogen load has decreased very significantly. The worst case, 1976, we're down to about half of what we were in the 1970s. A big drop with the wastewater treatment plants. At the same time, there was also stormwater enacted. And you could see that even with 1 million more people in the watershed, we're still seeing a reduction in nitrogen load over time. Our sources have changed significantly. In the 1970s, point sources, primarily wastewater treatment plants, accounted for more than 50% of our external nitrogen load. Non-point sources was about 16%, air pollution 21%. Groundwater. This is I know a big issue for y'all with septic systems. We don't have a lot of septic systems in Tampa Bay. Most of them are on central sewer now in the industrialized and urbanized areas, residential areas. So that is not an issue that we have had to deal with as much as other areas of the country. If you look at the most recent information on sources in Tampa Bay, our non-point source now is the big one. This is the stormwater. It's now 62%. Air pollution is about the same percentage, even though everything has been reduced. But the mix of sources have been reduced very significantly. The point sources now only make up 12% of our total nitrogen load. When you look at the sources in the stormwater piece, that 62% that is now stormwater. Intensive agriculture is about 19%. Residential, though, is our big one. That's 32%, which is why many of our local governments are focusing on landscape practices within their watersheds. You look at per capita load, it's been reduced by about 80%. And again, we've seen more people in the watershed, but less nitrogen coming off of the watershed over time because of the many projects that have been implemented throughout the watershed. And with this reduction in nitrogen load, we also have seen water quality improved. This graphic shows these are average annual chlorophyll A concentrations in 4 major bay segments of Tampa Bay. When we were not meeting the water quality goal that will allow enough light to reach the seagrasses in 1950, you see a red, and starting in 1974, you can see that most of the time we were not meeting those water quality targets. Advanced wastewater treatment, this is in 1980 is when all of our wastewater treatment plants enacted their reductions. You can see it took about 5 years before we started seeing improvements in water quality. So even though there was a significant reduction in a very short period of time, it still took about 5 years to see that. So persistence is really important over time. Stormwater regulations were enacted in about 1985. Again, we started seeing improvements in about 1990 or so. The Nitrogen Management Consortium that was formed in 1996. And you can see since about that time, we have been meeting water quality goals that allows adequate light for seagrasses over time. You see a couple times there, 1984, 1988, when we weren't meeting those chlorophyll A targets or water clarity targets, those were times when we had very heavy rains associated with El Nino. But so when things like that happen, we don't meet the targets. But the encouraging thing is that the bay seems to be resilient enough now so it bounces back the year after that. So that's a very encouraging piece. We're still seeing some algae blooms in one of our sections of the bay. We've got some modeling going on now to evaluate that. So we've got work to do, but overall it's been a good trend over time. This is a chlorophyll A in population. Again, you can see how the population has grown very significantly, but the amount of algae in the water column has declined even with that population. And this was the big news we had earlier this year. That 1950 seagrass goal was met in this year. Very exciting. When I started in 1990 with the estuary program, I thought maybe if we were really focused on working through this, that we might meet goals in about 2030. And so having, I think one of the things that we're seeing here is sort of a feedback loop as we get more seagrass. It takes up more nitrogen. The water is clearer. It reduces sediment turbidity in the water column. And I think that because we're seeing more seagrass, we're getting more seagrass because the water quality is better over time. So again, very exciting news, but we've got more people coming into the watershed every day, and you know, being able to maintain this is going to be a very major effort going forward. So when we talked about the seagrass goal, there were a lot of people that were very excited about it, and then there were some people that said, "Oh, what's the big deal? You know, if you're a fisherman, if you like clear water in the bay, if you swim in it, that's great. That's good news for fish, wildlife, and human users of the bay. But about 50% of the people in the watershed don't actually use the bay, you know, I think that's the case in almost all watersheds. So what we have done over the last just year or so is to add other metrics in addition to water quality with the stoplight graphic that we show every year and the increase in seagrass. We've started to take a look at economic valuation metrics as a way to talk about how important the bay, a healthy bay, is to our area. And this has gotten us into parts of the sectors of our watershed and of our population that we've never met before. We've never been able to address, you know, meet because they don't have an interest as much of clear water and seagrasses as many people do. This is an article from the Tampa Bay Business Journal. This is the first one on the health of the bay in the Tampa Bay Business Journal. This was an economic valuation study where we looked at not just what the value of having a bay there for transportation or that sort of thing, but what is the added value of the fact that the bay is healthy now? And so this was a question that the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, which has an economic valuation model, we work with them on this. And it turns out that 1 out of every 5 jobs in the estuary program watershed depends on a healthy bay. Not just the fact that there's a bay here, but the fact that it's healthy. That translates to about $22 billion within the 6 counties around the bay, or 13% of the economy. This has gotten me into real estate offices and business groups that we've just not been able to reach before because of the importance of a healthy bay to the economy of the Tampa Bay area. We've also looked at ecosystem services. This is a project with EPA where we looked at the denitrification value of meeting the seagrass goal. Again, there's some overall estimates of how much nitrogen per meter square per year a seagrass will denitrify over time and take the nitrogen actually out of the system. It turns out that's about $26.4 million per year in replacement value based on wastewater treatment plant costs. Or when you look at it in a different way, that has precluded the need for a new medium-sized wastewater treatment plant, our increase in seagrass over time. So these sorts of metrics have become more and more important as we're talking about not just clean water and a healthy environment, but also the economic benefits of having a healthy bay. Certainly emerging water quality challenges, we have them just like everyone else does. Population increases, new and expanded nitrogen sources. the consortium, there is no extra room in there for new sources. So when a new source comes in, we are needing to find a way to offset that through working with the consortium, and they, some of them are building up credits, perhaps to sell, but that is something that is market driven as much as anything else. Sea level rise, climate change, ocean acidification, certainly we all are working with these challenges over time. Our population is expected to double by 2050. So we are looking at essentially the same amount of effort as what we put in so far to maintain what we've gotten. Sea level rise has risen about 1 inch per decade since 1950s, with expected to increase in the coming decades. So, all of us are working on these and working with these issues over time. So it will take continued effort in a collaborative way, because it's not one entity or one sector of the economy that's going to be driving this. It's going to have to be from all sectors. So just sort of a summary of the process and metrics that seem to be key elements that have worked in Tampa Bay's management strategy. The first one is a really important one, the target resource. In our case, it was seagrass. It sounds like eelgrass is a very important one for y'all, and possibly shellfish. But that those target resources are identified, both the public and scientists, as worthy indicators. It's going to take a lot to get to those targets, or to maintain those targets if you have them now and you don't want to lose them. So they have to be worthy. Community willing to work together toward common goals. You all in this room here are just showing that you've got this. I'm very, very excited to see this here. Science-based numeric goals and targets has been critical. The amount of time that we spent on developing the science to go through the process of, okay, we've got this goal now, what's it going to take to get there, and how do we quantify each of those steps of the way, has been very important, not just for us as scientists, but also our resource managers, our elected officials, and the regulatory agencies that we're working with in order to be able to develop this. Multiple tools. Regulation has been important. Public-private collaborative actions, we've seen that. Citizen action has been huge. Long-term monitoring, critical, and it sounds like you all have another strong monitoring program here. If we didn't know where we had been, we wouldn't know where we were or where we're going. So that monitoring program, it's difficult to keep it going because it's not a sexy research project, but it's really critical. Assessment and adjustment over time. We have certainly run into elements where we've had to say, oh, that didn't work. Let's see what else does. And most recently, this link to economic value has allowed us to talk to a lot of different audiences about how important a healthy bay is, and that's been a real important piece there too. So that is what I have. I will be really happy to answer your questions. I think seeing how dedicated all of you here are and how passionate you are about making sure that the Buzzards Bay and your areas remain pristine to the extent they can and are improved to those areas that need improvement is real exciting to see. So you're far along the way, which is great to see.